I'm going to be talking to you just a little bit today about drones. And I want to make one thing clear. I'm not a drone apostle or a prophet. In fact, I stumbled into it when I went to work for the University of North Dakota. When I went to work for the University of North Dakota, I didn't realize that I had a research responsibility as well as a professor, and they told me about that after I got there. And so a friend of mine, a retired Army aviator, was actually our interim director of our UAS center, and he said, "Hey, I think there's a lot of opportunity for drones in law enforcement, and you've got a law enforcement background. Why don't you think about doing that?" And so that became my research topic, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that in just a moment. So where we're going to be headed today is I'll just tell you just a little bit about myself, and that's always a thin line, right? Because you don't want to brag, but you want to establish some credibility. So I'll try to do that. And then we're going to talk about some applications of small unmanned aircraft systems. So if you train people, what are they going to do? Are there really jobs out there? And then we'll talk a little bit about, as a training provider, which most of us are, what could you do? What could you incorporate into your business that might bring you some money and bring some knowledge to your students? And then we're going to talk about kind of the pivotal section, which is 14 CFR Part 107, which is a small UAS rule. Many of you are very familiar with it. Those of you that aren't, I'm going to hit on a few of the key sections that would be important to you as a training provider. And then we're going to talk about Part 89, okay, which is the basically the identification of small unmanned aircraft systems in broadcasting an ID signal. And I actually was privileged to sit on the FAA's ARC on that, and I was pleased to see that the final rule actually resembled what we had recommended from the Aviation Rulemaking Committee. So that's me in Saudi Arabia a few years ago. I went over there to help establish a helicopter training site for the University of North Dakota. And my career is really broken into three areas. One is law enforcement, and I stumbled into it because I found out that a fraternity brother at Middle Tennessee State University had the most perfect schedule, and he was a freshman like me. And I said, excuse my language, but how in the hell did you get that schedule? And he said, well, I work for the campus police department. They let us register day one. And I'd been working in the restaurant industry, and I said, that day I walked over and I got a job at the campus police department, the most hated job on campus, writing parking tickets. But guess what? Next semester, I got to register number one and got all the classes I wanted. So that's how I stumbled into law enforcement. And then in academia, I also stumbled into it. But a captain at the police department I was working for came up to me after a presentation and said, "Hey, we're looking for instructors at the community college to teach administration of justice. Would you be interested in that?" And I thought, yeah, that would be cool. So I ended up doing that, and then ended up teaching aviation there as well. And before I left, it was Glendale Community College was the chair of the Administration of Justice Department and the Aviation Department. And then it came time to retire, and I didn't really know exactly what I wanted to do, but I saw an opportunity at the University of North Dakota and thought, wow, they'll never hire me because I don't have a PhD. I just have a master's degree. But I interviewed by phone, and then they invited my wife. I want to shout out to her, is right there in the center in the white. They invited us out to interview, and we loved North Dakota, and we made the move, which is a really unusual one, right? Most of the people go from North Dakota to California or Florida. We did the reverse. We went from California to North Dakota. And like many of you, aviation's a passion for me, and I worked many, many part-time jobs, as well as some paid jobs. I flew for the police department, I flew for Alpine Air, I flew aerial survey. I currently fly for Altru Care Flight, a PC-12 for them as an air ambulance pilot. So like all of you, it just turns me on that I'm able to fly an airplane and get paid for it. Like a professional baseball player, right? It's just awesome. So that's been very, very good. One of the more interesting jobs I had was flying low-level traffic in Los Angeles and Orange County. And you're a much more educated audience, but when I tell people that, they have the impression that the reporters and the pilots are one and the same, right? Which occasionally there are a couple of those critters out there, but usually it's a reporter and a pilot is flying them around. And that's what I was doing. I was flying a reporter around. And I had a number of really, really talented reporters that weren't nervous at all in the aircraft, but I had a few that were kind of nervous. I haven't had anyone quite as nervous as this next guy, which is Brock Favors, but you see, what would it be like to fly with Brock Favors? Awesome.
Hello, everybody out there.
Well, to give you the rest of the story, Brock Favors and his reporter did survive. It was a successful auto rotation, and they still went on to do additional reporting. Hey, let's talk a little bit about so what are the employment opportunities out there in small unmanned aircraft systems? And so first of all, in just commercial video and photography, just artistic perspectives, really cool photos that can be done by a relatively untrained person at a relatively low cost, right? And that's the really beautiful thing about small unmanned aircraft, right, is we can do a lot of things that we can do with manned aircraft. By no means none. We're still going to have jobs, folks, but we can do a lot of things with a small unmanned aircraft. Very low training costs to train the personnel, very low acquisition costs for the aircraft, and very low recurrent costs for operating the aircraft. So it's not going to take our place. And I used to be on the road teaching for the Airborne Law Enforcement Association a lot. And in the very beginning of this, some 10 years ago, I would have guys go, "Hey, you're just trying to get us out of business. Why would you do this? You used to be a law enforcement pilot." And I said, look, it is not going to take us out of business. It will do about maybe 15 to 20% of the missions that we can do. And those 15 or 20% of the missions, it can actually do better than we can do. But there's still 80% of the missions out there. Don't worry, guys and gals, we're going to continue to have a job. So beautiful artistic perspectives. You can't help but watch films now and realize that the vast majority of aerial shots are now shot by drones. Why? It's just better at doing it. It's cheaper, obviously cost effective. You don't need as much training to be able to do it. And just the noise factors where you don't have to take out the noise of a helicopter or a fixed wing that's shooting as a platform for the footage and so forth. Sporting events, football season, right? How many have seen drones flying over football games, right? Again, getting unique perspectives on the game, which is really, really cool. Try to do that with a fixed-wing aircraft. And it's really cool to have the Goodyear blimp up over you, but we weren't getting those kind of shots from the Goodyear blimp, folks. Real estate advertising, especially with high-priced properties, what a great way to illustrate the property. And if you've ever looked around at real estate websites, you've probably even seen some interior tours of high-value properties that are done with small drones, and really cool perspectives of those properties. Construction progress, what a neat way to be able to gauge the progress, to update your investors, and also to be looking at it from an engineering standpoint and a progress standpoint, and taking periodic videos and then sharing them with your clients. And then, of course, just the wow factor of having a beach wedding and having footage of it from a drone that will now, for perpetuity, you can now share with your family and go back and look at 20 years later. So a whole other aspect of wedding photography. Law enforcement was where I got involved with it. That research project that I told you about actually resulted in the creation of what we call the Northeast Region Unmanned Aircraft Systems Unit, which is a partnership between now 5 agencies in the Grand Forks County area operating small unmanned aircraft. And we started way back in 2011, and back then you could count the number of law enforcement agencies that were utilizing drones on 2 hands and still have some fingers left. This was a very interesting time in dealing with the FAA to try to actually get authorization to enter into the National Airspace System. That predated Part 107 by a good 5 years, so we got access through certificates of authorization or waiver, which many of you know was never intended to be for small unmanned aircraft. It was primarily intended for air show performers that had to do things that normally would have stretched or broken FAA regulations. But that's how we got access to the National Airspace System. So some of the things that we can do in law enforcement is documenting crime scenes. So I've since retired from the Grand Forks Sheriff's Office, but in the 7 years that I ran our unit, we investigated more than 7 homicides. And sleepy Grand Forks County, unfortunately, we had 7 homicides, and we were able to capture, again, very unique both video footage and still footage that helped our investigators in the ultimate prosecution of the offenders in those homicide cases, as well as a variety of other high-profile cases. In one particular case, we used a UAS to demonstrate that a rapist was actually a sexual predator, and that he had gone to the extent of renting an apartment that had a view of his victim's bedroom window. And we actually took footage from outside the apartment window showing the perspective that was ultimately presented in court. Another case in which we used it, which was very, very useful, was many of you have heard of the DAPL protests, which was a pipeline that was being developed, an oil pipeline in western North Dakota, and it resulted in quite a few protesters coming to North Dakota. And the great thing was 90% of them were lawful protesters that were merely exercising their First Amendment right to protest this. Unfortunately, about 10% of them were not peaceful, and they were there just to be disruptive. So members of Antifa and some other organizations that came and caused a lot of problems. Well, just to kind of cut to the chase, we flew basically 12 hours a day there for about 7 weeks, and we captured a lot of footage. Initially, we were doing it to just give a heads up to our ground law enforcement officers where these folks were headed, because they were trying to block access to drill sites and so forth. Then we started utilizing it very overtly, because we found that when the drone was up, violence decreased. And why did violence decrease? Because people knew that they were being videotaped and that they would be relatively easy to identify. So I thought that was kind of an interesting use of it. Well, in the course of this covert use of the UAS, unbeknownst to our officers, because it was there was so much going on in this day, it was just an all-out riot. At one point, a protester was being taken into custody and was wrestled to the ground. It was a female protester. In the course of this, she reached into a bag she was carrying and pulled out a 6-shot revolver and was just bringing it out. You haven't heard of this person, because the deputies that were involved in it was some North Dakota Highway Patrol troopers and some deputies from the local sheriff's department were able to wrestle the weapon away from her. But she was ultimately charged with attempted murder, and her story and a few of her witnesses' stories were very different. Okay, it wasn't even her gun, it dropped out, it was a throwdown gun from a deputy and this type of thing. It became a federal case, and the federal prosecutor contacted us and said, hey, we understand that you had drones up. Do you think you have footage of this? And I said, gosh, I think my deputies would have told me that, but the keeper of this is this particular sheriff's department. We can go back to that day. It's all time dated and stamped, and we can, if you can give me an approximate time during that day, we can go back and look at the footage. And sure enough, we were able to do that and find that the exact account of the troopers and the deputies is what the video captured. So the federal prosecutor went to the defense team on this and showed them the video, and you know what, all of a sudden the defendant decided to plea out to the case rather than go to trial on it. So a lot of useful purposes at crime scenes. The next thing is suspect searches, looking for bad guys, utilizing standard video, but also utilizing enhanced sources such as infrared and night vision that we can now mount onto drones. In the same vein, looking for lost persons, an elderly person that's walked away from a board and care, a small child that's walked away. We can cover a much larger area in a much shorter period of time utilizing an asset like a drone. Tactical situations, imagine a special weapons and tactics team that needs to execute a high-risk search warrant at a methamphetamine lab. You want some intelligence on that. You want to know where the doors are, where the people are, what the habits of the people are, so that you can do it not only the safest manner for the law enforcement officers, but also in the safest manner for the people that you're going to take into custody. And by doing surveillance with a drone prior to that, taking photos and video that can be analyzed by the scout snipers on that team, they can determine the safest way to execute that. We're also able to videotape the actual entry of the special weapons team. So if there's any question about the use of force or the manner in which the team executed the search warrant, we're able to go back on video evidence of that. So very useful for that. Traffic collision investigations, we conducted, at the time I left, well over 200 of them, major traffic collisions that had either serious injuries or fatalities. And again, we're able to use measurement tools to measure skid marks. We're able to see debris pass. We're able to see a totally different perspective than the officers on the ground that are investigating it, and make that part of their serious traffic collision investigation. And then finally, large event monitoring. No, not to spy on people, but to do things like help on determining the most efficient way to ingress and egress the venue at the beginning and at the conclusion of the event. So we can change traffic light patterns. We can put officers out there with point intersection control, directing traffic when we see choke points where traffic is backing up and so forth. So just making it more efficient for those concert goers and convention goers. In the area of fire service, again, giving a real-time, higher level of situational awareness to command staff so that they know where they can best deploy their personnel, anything from an engine to a truck to a team that's going to go in and enter and search the property. Hazmat incidents, being able to get up close to an overturned tanker car on a train and be able to see the placard on it. What does that hazmat placard say without getting people close to that potential danger? If there's been a spill from a tanker car on a roadway or a railroad tanker car, how far has that spill propagated? We don't have to get people up close to it. We can fly a drone in to be able to see that. In the area of wildland fire, being able to monitor the wildland fire, be able to actually determine the size of the wildland fire, which in many cases determines what level of resources are going to be able to be commanded by the incident commander. And one way of fighting wildland fires is to actually create another fire. You know, the fight fire with fire, and that is you create a fire in front of the main front of the fire and burn out the fuel in a very controlled manner. That's normally done by wildland firefighters on the ground with flame torches that are basically spewing out napalm. It can also be done from drones, and they're shooting basically ping pong balls that ignite as they leave the drone through a little flame, and then you are actually starting the backfire from a drone. You know, really kind of cool stuff. Hotspot locating, this is kind of the cleanup task after a fire, whether it be a wildland fire or a structure fire, so that the fire doesn't reignite because of maybe a hidden hotspot up in the ceiling of a structure, or a hotspot in the duff, all of that stuff that lays on a forest floor. So if we're able to determine those hotspots, directing firefighters to it, and that can be done with an infrared sensor on a drone very, very effectively. And then finally, although this has not hit the United States yet, there are some departments in EASA or Europe and Asia that are utilizing high lift capacity drones to actually lift fire hoses off sources on the ground and direct a firefighting stream of water into high-rise buildings. So what an innovative way of doing that. When we get outside of public safety and photography, we have infrastructure inspections. In many cases, very dangerous applications where people were having to scale up very tall towers to inspect the towers periodically, or to get into odd positions on bridges and dams. We're able to do that with a drone very, very effectively. So everything from wind turbines to dams to cellular towers, power lines, pipelines, and bridges all can be inspected very, very effectively with the drone. And the inspector doesn't even have to be the drone operator. The inspector can merely be someone who's been trained in what needs to be imaged, take the images, and then pass those off to someone who's an expert in actual analysis of those structures, and that person could be on the other side of the world. So again, increasing efficiency of infrastructure inspections. Other applications, and I'll add at this point, other applications are only limited by your imagination and other entrepreneurs' imaginations, but a few of them are in agricultural, both the monitoring of crops, hydration levels, and just the overall healthiness of the crop, as well as aerial application. Again, that hasn't taken off in a big way in this country yet, but in Asia it has taken off. And they're actually using drones to do what we would have considered aerial seeding and application of aerial agents like herbicides and pesticides and so forth. That can be done from a drone. Border security, the agency that I was with, the Grand Forks Sheriff's Office, at the end of my career, we actually partnered with the local Border Patrol office, so Customs and Border Protection, on a grant to actually provide drone coverage along the Canadian-U.S. border at hot points. And so they were able to provide us with intelligence of where they were seeing the most crossings, and then we would go up there periodically along with CBP agents on the ground, monitor the border, and then direct CBP agents when we detected people crossing over the border. So a very, again, effective and cost-efficient way of doing aerial surveillance of the border. Facility security at a variety of high-risk facilities, from nuclear plants to armament plants to something as simple as your business. You want a higher level of security at your business, periodic patrols that are, I would highly guess, are more effective than having a security guard walk around the perimeter. Dignitary protection. Imagine at the first assassination attempt of President-elect Trump, had a drone been up there, would we have seen that sniper on the roof of that building? I'm not sure, because when I've looked at that, as all of you have, there's so many breaches in protocols that occurred at that incident that I'm not sure that a drone would have helped. But it sure should have helped to be able to detect someone that was in a secure area that should not have been there. And then mapping and surveying. One of the many jobs I did part-time to feed my aviation habit was flying aerial survey for a company in Burbank, and then again a company in Grand Forks. Very, very expensive cameras, 2 crew members, a pilot, camera system operator in the back. Many of those jobs can now be done by drones. So, all right. And then there is that pie in the sky application, right? You remember about 6 years ago, Prime Air came into existence, and we were all told that, gosh, before long, the very near future, all your packages are going to be delivered from Amazon to your doorstep. Well, hasn't quite come to fruition, has it? And it's not because the technology is lacking, folks. It's, I believe, more a sociological and infrastructure limitation to that. Like when we deliver a package to your house, where do we put it? How do we know we're not going to land on top of your dog or your cat? That type of thing. And are people ready for that? Are they ready for a package to be dropped off, by a drone in their front yard? So will it come? I think so, but I don't think it's on the timeline that Prime Air predicted a few years ago. All right. Now, interestingly, all of this is enabled because it's just really, really easy, right? It's so easy, chimpanzees can do it. Okay. Let's first step into the water with Part 107, and then we'll come back and talk a little more specifically about it. So as I mentioned earlier, Part 107 was enacted back in 2016. It was ostensibly to allow commercial operations in the National Airspace System. So prior to that, those operations had been conducted pursuant to COAs, or Certificates of Authorization. And then along came Part 107. Well, it doesn't specifically say anything about governmental operations, but as we kind of probed into it, the FAA said, well, gosh, yeah, you could use it for governmental operations. You just have to completely comply with Part 107. So in its most basic form, what it allows is commercial and governmental operations in the National Airspace System without utilizing some special entry ticket like a COA. It has to be small unmanned aircraft systems, which are those that are at a takeoff weight below 55 pounds. And it's generally below 400 feet AGL. And there's some speed limits on the drone and so forth, but those are so high that it really isn't a factor. But those are the biggies, right? Staying below 400 feet and being less than 55 pounds. And you can actually get into controlled airspace as well, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a moment. So those are the bare bones of Part 107, and most of you know that, right? Now, what about just hobbyists? You just want to go out there and you want to fly your drone. And so the FAA was very sensitive to this, as was the ARC that came up with the rules. Their suggestions for rules, and they said, hey, we don't want to interfere with people who are just hobbyists. And so they came up with carved out an exception, and it is the exception for limited recreational operations of unmanned aircraft. And first of all, it says it must be absolutely for recreational purposes. You can't say, well, I'm a reserve deputy and I have my own drone, so I'm going to fly it, in support of the sheriff's office. No. It's mission specific. As soon as you say, I'm going to fly in support of the sheriff's office, then it now becomes something that is under the purview of Part 107. Okay, even to a farmer. You're a farmer and you have a farm and you say, hey, I'm going to use my drone. I'm going to go out there and I'm going to look at the crop health with my drone. Can't do that. It's not recreational. That is now, and this is the FAA, this isn't me, but this is the FAA saying that is now a commercial operation. Even though you own the drone, it's your farm, because you are utilizing it in the furtherance of your commercial business, then it's now a Part 107 operation. So it has to be strictly for recreational purposes. They say it has to be under the guidelines of a community-based organization. Well, they didn't want to say the Academy of Model Aeronautics, but that is the premier model aeronautics organization, the AMA. It could be some other community-based organization, but most people operating in this exception are AMA members, and they're utilizing that, the guidelines set out by AMA. So it has to be kept within visual sight of the pilot or an observer who's in direct contact with the pilot. Has to give way to manned aircraft. And if you're going to go into class Bravo, Charlie, Delta, or the Echo surface area associated with an airport, you have to have FAA authorization. Again, less than 400 feet, and you have to take a little exam. It's called the Trust Exam, and the FAA really had to reach out to make this acronym fit. But the Trust Exam is the Recreational UAS Safety Test. And I think it's 25 questions, if I recall. It's free and it's online, and you get a little certificate after you complete that. And then finally, the aircraft must be registered with the FAA, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a moment. All right, so, gosh, this getting access to controlled airspace, that sounds kind of tough. Do I have to call the center or the TRACON or the tower? And the answer is, well, 10 years ago, that's exactly what we did. But the FAA said, hey, there's got to be a better way to do that. So they came up with LANC, and LANC is the Low Altitude Airspace and Notification Capability. And as the FAA has done quite frequently, they kind of took that monkey of developing that and let it jump onto private industry's back, which is probably a pretty good thing. And so that monkey jumped onto private industry's back, and we now actually have 10 authorized providers, and 7 of those 10 authorized providers actually have smartphone apps with Android and iOS capability. And so it really is pretty simple. The way LANC works is the UAS program office in DC reached out to, and there were different phases of it, but I believe it was 3 phases out to different air traffic control facilities, and basically asked the question, hey, we want you to grid out your airspace in relatively small grids, 1 nautical mile square, and in that 1 nautical mile square, how comfortable would you be with a drone flying in there and the operator not talking to you? Okay, you would be comfortable there. What altitude would you be comfortable at? And so we see these grids around airports, okay? And now what LANC does is it merely is looking at that data. Okay, what did the Grand Forks Tower say about their Class Delta airspace? If I am 1 mile southwest of the field, can I fly there? And if I can, what's the maximum altitude that I can fly at? And we'll say it's 200 feet. Okay, so if you populate a flight in there in your smartphone app at 190 feet on a particular day at a particular time, within seconds it's going to come back and say your flight is authorized. And that is it. It's going to give you an authorization number, and you have now gotten access to that controlled airspace. So it is literally that simple. So very, very good. Okay. Those of you that like looking at diagrams, this is the way LANC works. If you're under any misconception that the tower or the center or the TRACON is getting notification of your flight, let me dispel you of that. That's not occurring. You're just merely being able to fly in an area that they're not that concerned about at that particular altitude, right? And as you can imagine, the closer you get to the airport, the lower those ceilings are. The further away we get, the ceilings come up. And there are zero quadrants as well. You can still get access to those, but those require a little bit more work. And in those zero quadrants are generally over the airport itself and in very close proximity to instrument approaches for that airport. All right, so let's talk about some training provider opportunities. That's what you really want to hear about, right? So what I want you to do is imagine some of these different applications that we talked about and now think, oh gosh, how could I provide training in that particular area? So one of the things would be counter-drone technology. And you may not know it, but very close to us up in Grand Forks in Ely, Minnesota. Anybody been to Ely, Minnesota? Yeah, it's kind of a cool place, okay? Lots of winter sports up there. Well, actually, up in Ely was one of the kind of the birthplaces of counter-drone operations. So let me introduce you to a couple of friends from Ely.
You know, we've got a long relationship both in friendship but also in hunting.
We've been hunting together for years, and now frankly, we're just madder than a hatter about these drones.
You know, I was always manning the gun, shooting. He was spotting for me. He's got a lot of pair of binoculars. He just picked up his 7th pair when Radio Shack was closing. He got a good deal there. You know, I've been taking this community ed class on electronics, and Stan's got a real good eyesight. He's been looking at things ever since he was born. And I thought, well, how can we put these two skills together? We got plenty of normal hunting experience, and a lot of it bleeds over into electronics hunting, but your method changes quite a bit. I developed an app on my phone here. It releases an electronic magnetic pulse, an EMP. It'll take those babies right out of the air. It's invisible. It's invisible.
Yeah, he just punches a few little keys right there into his cell phone, and you know, in theory, they come right down.
In theory, they do. In theory, they do. Right now, it's mostly just turning on and off TVs and you know, frying people's cars.
I made myself a card here that's got all the different kinds of drones on it.
Those bigger ones, that might be military or governmental drones. That makes me a little worried. I definitely don't want to get in trouble with the government.
And we take privacy pretty seriously up here in Ely. We don't like it when people are spying on us at the fishing hole or when we're sunbathing.
Sunbathing?
Well, you know, from time to time I've seen Julia, my neighbor. She gets out there and catches some rays.
You're watching Julia sunbathe and just...
I'm not watching. I'm out there legitimate purpose here, Anton. I'm trying to get better at the spotting thing.
Oh, you're as bad as those drones out here.
Absolutely not. It's a totally different circumstance, Anton, and I kind of resent the accusation. So that's what we're really about here, is taking these drones down, pulling them down out of the sky.
So if anybody knows how to debug iPhone code or calibrate electromagnets, drop me a line.
Yeah, you can get him on the internet.
You can find him at home.
So who would have known that little sleepy Ely, Minnesota would have been an innovator in anti-drone technology? What about some other training provider opportunities? Well, gosh, there's our own John King with an online Part 107 exam prep course. Great way to prep for the exam. UAS repair and maintenance. So many community college, technical colleges are now incorporating this into their programs, especially ones that had prior A&P training programs, how to repair small unmanned aircraft. In-person exam preps. I did this quite a while for the Airborne Law Enforcement Association and did a 2-day course, kind of reminiscent of the road show that Martha and John did for many years, and would go around and do a 2-day course. Unfortunately, we didn't have the convenience of doing the knowledge test on the last day. That's really cool, but they were at least prepped to go do that after that. Actually, in-person UAS operator training. Okay, there's lots of folks out there that would like to get some guidance and expertise on how to actually safely operate these systems. Specialized operations using infrared, using a night vision or NVG, just law enforcement applications, like how do you conduct an indoor operation? If we're trying to clear a school of an active shooter, what's the best way? What techniques that we can use? And I want you to imagine that for just a second, folks. We're all just, absolutely appalled when we see these school shootings. But think about a team that has to go in there and clear that school. And things have changed. Back the first school shooting, if you remember, the really big high profile was Columbine, Colorado, right? And the officers that responded to that waited outside exactly like they were supposed to do, because that was the way they were trained with an active shooter until a special weapons team got there. And unfortunately, a lot of fatalities occurred as a result of that. That was a paradigm change for law enforcement on active shooters. Now law enforcement agencies are trained, and we train line level personnel to enter immediately once they get together what we call a diamond team, enter and go towards the shooter. And that's maybe odd to you if you haven't been in the military, but that means there's a body right here. We step over the body and continue going towards the shooter. Because while that shooter's shooting, they're continuing to injure and kill people. Now, what if when you were doing that, you were able to clear a corner instead of having to, kind of box that corner and come around and maybe expose yourself to the shooter? What if you had a small drone that you were able to launch from your hand, have a little camera on your harness, and be able to fly it around a corner and then tell your teammates, clear, nobody in the hallway, and continue to very rapidly clear that school until you got to the shooter and you were able to take them into custody. So just great applications for special operations. And then college and degree programs. So UND prides themselves on having the first 4-year collegiate UAS program, but they weren't very far ahead of many other universities, including Embry-Riddle, Purdue, Middle Tennessee State. So there are many universities out there and community colleges that have 2- and 4-year degree programs. And that's something that should be a real indicator that this isn't going away, folks. When public education gets involved in it and creates curricula, that usually means this is probably going to be with us for a while. All right, going on with training provider opportunities, when we talk about processing the data, GIS data, global information systems, okay, how to crunch that data. When we talk about surveying and mapping, how to bring that together into matrixed maps. And so that's a whole other, post-image processing capability that training could be provided in. The use of infrared cameras. FLIR actually puts on a 2-day course for law enforcement personnel on how to effectively use the technology. And I used it extensively when I was with the Glendale Police Department in the Air Support Unit, and I flew with a fellow there, John Gilkerson, just an excellent guy, pilot, tactical flight officer, and I used to love to fly with him because he was great on the infrared. And you know why he was great? Because he kept using it. He practiced, he used it. We'd just be flying around and he'd have infrared images up and he'd say, hey, orbit that school. I got a hot spot in the northeast corner, and that type of thing. So a great opportunity there to train people how to properly use that. For 2 years, I was at Georgetown University as a senior fellow, and I was assigned full-time to the National Institute of Standards and Technology. And my job there was to work as part of a multidisciplinary team that was putting together training for public safety personnel. And so I developed a course to train proctors for something called the Basic Proficiency Evaluation for Remote Pilots, or the BPERP for short. And what the BPERP is it's a quick 10-minute flight that an UAS operator conducts around some buckets, 5-gallon buckets that have targets in them, and they capture images of these targets in these buckets in a particular flight path. And it is a motivator towards proficiency. And it has great applicability and transferability to a lot of things that we do in the operation of drones. And a lot of times people look at it and go, how can this be really applicable? And why is it motivational? It's motivational because we're competitive, right? If we go fly this and it took me 8 minutes and 30 seconds to do it, and I got a score of 39, but this, person next to me, this lady, she got it in 7 minutes, and she got a higher score than me. It's like, that's competitive. I want to keep practicing this. And as you practice it, skills come up. So And the cool thing about that, it's totally available to you. It's paid for by our tax dollars. All of the curricula, all of the targets, all the assembly instructions for the apparatus are all online at the NIST robotics test site. And you're totally free to adopt all of that. And in fact, NIST encourages that, spread the pollen. Another one would be military applications, sometimes kind of tough to break into this market, but specific applications that the military would like to utilize the aircraft for, as well as counter-UAS operations. So the military is very, very concerned now about the infringement of military-based airspace by drones. And so providing red cell technology where you're actually the aggressor contracting with the military, and do they have ways of neutralizing your drone or protecting their base against your small unmanned aircraft. Training in the specifics of agricultural application, whether that be a pesticide or an herbicide or aerial seeding, very specific operations in doing that. And then the specific way to inspect infrastructures, okay, whether it be a dam, a power line, a cell tower, that type of thing. So again, only limited by your imagination. Those are just a few possibilities that you as a training provider could get on board with and develop a training program. All right, so I promised we'd go a little bit deeper into 107. I'm going to go relatively quickly here with the belief that many of you are probably already familiar with these sections, but 107.3 is a definition section. You can't have any compendium of FARs without definitions, right? So it defines an unmanned aircraft essentially as an aircraft that flies without human intervention on board the aircraft. I mean, that kind of breaks it down. And then we say a small unmanned aircraft, we're going to take that unmanned aircraft, assimilate it, and then say, hey, it's got to be less than 55 pounds gross takeoff weight. And then we talk about a small unmanned aircraft system, which is the more inclusive term, and that would include the aircraft itself, the airframe, it would include the ground control station, hand controller, any type of sensor system that you put aboard the aircraft. So again, it is more inclusive. All right, so some interesting sections, and again, I've kind of cherry-picked them here, the ones that I thought that you might want to know about. 107.7 says that you have to have the remote pilot certificate in your possession. That's pretty straightforward. You have to have a photo ID. Isn't that amazing that every state in the union has been able to wrestle the beast to the ground that we have a photo on our driver's license? But the FAA just can't seem to do that. I just find that just amazing, but it is what it is, right? So who do you have to give that to? Well, God bless up in heaven Bob Hoover, but Bob Hoover would tell you about who to give it to, right? If you're not familiar with that, Bob Hoover, very famous air show performer, Southern gentleman, is ramp checked after an air show, and inspector asks to see his pilot's certificate and his medical, chats with him for a few minutes, and Bob says, hey, I need to go over here and talk to some of my fans and sign some photos. And the inspector says, oh, okay, well, nice talking to you. And Bob says, well, could I have my certificates back? He says, no, I've determined that you're not mentally competent to fly as a pilot in command, and you'll need to undergo a special evaluation to get those back. Well, folks, Bob ultimately won that, but it took him over a year to win that case. And so many organizations, including the AOPA, after that said, you know what, we can comply with this by merely showing it to an inspector or a law enforcement officer, okay? There's nothing that says you have to hand it to them. So I would recommend you take Bob Hoover's recommendation and the AOPA's recommendation as if you are asked to display this by an FAA inspector, an NTSB employee, or any federal, state, or local law enforcement officer, or a TSA representative, that you display it to them in compliance with the reg. Here's the front, here's the back. If they asked to physically take it, my answer would be, no, I'm sorry. And if you don't understand why, then research the Bob Hoover case and you'll understand why I don't want to hand that to you. Okay. Also under point 7, I find this kind of interesting, and it says it permits any FAA employee to inspect and or test the UAS. Wow, that's kind of interesting. It also says that if you have a declaration of compliance, and we're going to pop into that very briefly at the end, but that has to do with flight over people. In certain categories, the manufacturer has to provide a declaration of compliance, so you have to show that to them. How about an accident? Okay, so do you have to report a UAS accident? And the answer is maybe, right? We got to go into definitions here. So If you are involved in one of these incidents, within 10 calendar days, you have to report this to the FAA. They actually make it easy for us. You can actually go to FAADroneZone.com or DroneZone.com or DroneZone.gov, sorry, FAADroneZone.gov, and they actually have a portal there where you can report UAS incident. But we go back to part 1 of the FARs to define what a serious injury is. But if there's a serious injury or a loss of consciousness, that's a reportable incident if it's involving a drone. If there's damage to any property, and interesting there, underlined and highlighted, other than the drone. You don't have to take the drone into account. If there is an incident that comes to one of these benchmarks, so if the total cost of repairing this damage is exceeding $500, okay, or if the market value of something that was destroyed other than the drone is greater than $500, then it becomes a reportable incident, all right? But you could have a multi-$1,000 drone completely destroy it, but damage no other property. It is not a reportable UAS accident, okay? All right, so how do you get this remote pilot certificate? Okay, so there's 2 paths to it, and we find the breadcrumbs in 107-65. An interesting part of it that we don't have, with our normal pilot certificate is we can extend our privileges. So do you have a remote pilot certificate?
Yes.
You do? Oh, doggone. How about you, sir? Oh, my gosh. Who doesn't?
On the first day.
Uh,
We got from on the first day you could get it.
First day. Well, that's great. That's wonderful.
Yeah, I had one of the first. I had behind all the inspectors in the office, I had the first one in the
There you go. How cool is that?
They were all handing each other certificates. It was hilarious.
Well, I know the lady behind you does it because she's my wife, so I know she doesn't, and she has absolutely no interest in drones whatsoever. But she could fly under my certificate as long as I was close enough to her to be able to take immediate control of the aircraft, right? So that's really kind of interesting. However, and she very rarely makes mistakes, but if she screwed up and made a mistake, guess whose certificate would be affected by that? Mine. Yeah, so when you extend that to somebody else, your certificate is on the line there. So, okay, now how do we stay recent? So most of you know if you're going to carry passengers, you have to have 3 takeoffs and landings in the category and class and type, if type rating is required, right? We're going to carry passengers. And then we all have to have a biennial flight review, right? Every 2 years or some equivalent to the biennial flight review. Well, how about with the drone? How do we stay recent with that? Well, kind of interesting. Within the previous 24 calendar months, you need to have either passed the initial certification exam or done your Part 61 online process, or you need to have completed a refresher course, and that's free. It's actually up on the FAA FAST site, the safety team site, and there's one for Part 61 rated pilots, and there's one for ab initio or non-Part 61 rated pilots. So you take that every 24 calendar months and you print out the certificate it gives you at the end, and then you display that, and that is your proof that you meet the recency of experience requirements in operating a drone. Okay. All right, so no endorsement needed, so we've gotten away from that. So anybody can just walk up there. There's no barometer as to how much study they've done or anybody saying that they're capable of the required knowledge for this. Okay. As I mentioned earlier, and we'll talk about it in just a moment a little further, if you're a Part 61 pilot, there's a somewhat streamlined process for this. If you're not, you would be considered a ab initio pilot. As an ab initio pilot, your initial certification exam has to be conducted at the CAT Center, kind of our only vendor left out there. All the others have dropped out of it, right? So you take and pay for it, take your initial knowledge exam there. And when I used to train this, I'd say, hey, 1 shot, 1 kill, none of you are going to fail, right? But if a friend of yours fails who didn't come to this prep course, what can they do? And the answer is just wait 14 days. There is, again, no endorsement needed. They wait 14 days. Presumably, they're doing remedial study during that time, and they can come back and take the knowledge exam again. All right. It is 50 questions, and the subject matter areas are under decimal 73. 70% passage rate, again, which is the usual with the FAA, right? And then just super quickly, there's 13 areas. I won't kill you with the PowerPoint. I'll just throw them up there. But these are the 13 areas that are covered on the ab initio exam. Okay. And so if you were putting a prep course together, you'd want to, of course, cover these 13 areas. And then for the Part 61 pilots, we reduced that to 8 areas, and here are those 8 areas that are on the Part 61. And this one's really kind of cool because it's a quiz that occurs at the end of the about 2-hour online course you take, which is available on the FAA FAST site. And folks, you can't fail really unless you just give up, because what it keeps doing is it puts you into remedial hell until you get 100% on it. And once you score 100% on it, then bingo, you're able to get your completion certificate. All right. So how about for an ab initio pilot? What do they got to do? So you've got a student in your school, or maybe you want to do it and you're not a Part 61 pilot, or you don't have a current BFR. What do? Well, first of all, you have to have an IACRA account. IACRA is that online FAA application site. You just go in there. It's kind of like getting a drugstore, frequent flyer card, but just a little bit more information you put in there. So you're going to establish that IACRA account, and it's going to issue what's called an FCN number to you, which is your number. You should hang on to that. And then once you've done that, of course, you're going to study for the remote pilot exam, and you're going to take John and Martha's online course or some other source of studying for it. And then once you've done that, you're going to make an appointment with the CATS Testing Center, and they are going to ask you for your FCN number. You've got to provide that FCN number, and then you'll show up on your appointed day, and you'll have 2 hours to take that 50-question exam. And then about 72 hours after that, because the CATS computer has to talk to the FAA computer, but it takes anywhere from 24 to 72 hours, those results will auto-populate actually into the IACRA system, and you'll be able to go in and populate and submit an application for a remote pilot certificate. Then what will happen is the FAA will pass your information on to TSA. TSA is going to compare your name against known terrorist lists and some other security checks. That usually takes anywhere from 24 hours to a week. And then once that TSA check is completed, then you'll get a notification. You can log back into IACRA and download a temporary pilot certificate. Like all temporaries, that's good for 60 days. And then at some point during that 60-day period, you should receive another plastic FAA certificate, which will be your remote pilot certificate, and it will be a different number than your manned pilot certificate, which I used to think, in fact, I argued with the FAA, hey, that's not good. I got 2 certificates, but then I thought it was really a stroke of genius. Because if I go out and I make a mistake and you want to come after my remote pilot certificate and you suspend it or revoke it, then hopefully that's not going to affect my ATP certificate. So I don't know. I haven't heard if there's any cases out there where that's occurred yet, but I'm sure going to argue that if that ever happens to me, right? That my violations were pursuant to my remote pilot certificate, so that doesn't affect my ATP, unless it's something with moral turpitude, right? And then they can come after everything. All right, so how about if you're Part 61 pilot, which is most of you out there that didn't raise your hands? You could argue this is easier or more difficult, but what you're going to do here is you're going to go online to the FAA FAST site, and you're going to search for and complete about a 2-hour narrated PowerPoint, and then at the end of that, you're going to take that quiz that you just can't fail, right? You're just going to keep retaking it until you pass it. And when you finish, it's going to allow you to download a PDF completion certificate. Then what you're going to do is you're going to log into your IACRA account. Among other things, during the application process, when you apply to be a remote pilot, it's going to ask you to upload that PDF of your completion certificate for that 2-hour course. You're going to do that. And this is where there's an extra step that may be a little bit of a hassle, but I completely understand it. Then you log out and you contact your favorite CFI, and that favorite CFI is going to have to log in and put your application number in there, and they're going to have to certify that they have, number one, verified that you meet the BFR requirements one way or another in the various ways you can meet that. And number two, that they have taken a look at your photo ID and your pilot certificate and validated those. Once they do that, they're going to go in and validate your application. It'll be released to you again and then you can go back in and submit the application, and it's actually miraculous. Usually within a couple of hours, you will have a temporary remote pilot certificate ready to download there, because you're able to skip the TSA step, where a ab initio pilot is not able to do that. So that is that process. Very, very, very easy. Okay. All right, so meeting the recency of experience requirement, already gone over that. Both ab initio pilots and Part 61 pilots every couple of years log into, or you don't even have to log in, but it's ideal to log into the FAA FAST site and complete the refresher there. Download the completion certificate and have that available for inspection. It's valid for 24 calendar months, and that will then show your recency of experience. All right, real quickly, operation over human beings, which used to not be allowed at all. Now the FAA has begun doing that, but they've established some different categories. There's 4 of them. And a lot of it's repetitive, so I'm going to throw a category up there, and then I'm going to say in future ones it's repetitive. But under category 1, I want you to note this. It does not say 55 pounds. It's not a typo. It says 0.55 pounds. Folks, that's something that you would hold in the palm of your hand, okay? If you're flying a less than 0.55 pound drone, it does not have any rotating parts, so it's going to have rotating blades, right? But if they're enclosed, okay, in blade guards, and you have it registered to be ID compliant, and we're going to quickly just close out with that in just a moment, then you can fly over people with it. It's kind of cool, all right? And it's all about, hey, if this hits someone, how much damage can it do? And then we go into category 2, and in category 2, I'll throw all of them up there again. Now, what we start looking at here is kinetic energy, which becomes a little bit more complex, but what the FAA is looking at is mass times velocity, right? And so this is where the certificates of compliance come in from the manufacturers, because they have to certify that their drone won't exceed this. And so for category 2, it's 11 foot-pounds of kinetic energy. And then the rest are pretty much the same, with the exception of, for some reason they threw in there, no safety defects. Like, what the hell? Like, I hope all aircraft don't have built-in safety defects, but they have that in there. You got to have a declaration of compliance. And if you're going to fly a sustained flight over people versus just crossing over them quickly, then you have to be ID compliant. Then we go to category 3. The only thing you're going to see different there is the kinetic energy. Okay, and so under category 3, it's 25 foot-pounds of kinetic energy. Okay, but everything else remains the same as category 2. All right, there is a category 4. It does not have a kinetic energy limit to it, but it can only be done in special applications in which people have provided permission for the drone to fly over them, i.e. think movies, right? So they're utilizing these large aircraft that are doing filming for films and movies. Then the people have to sign off their permission on that. And then we'll close out with ID and tracking. This is the ARC that I sat on, and I was kind of pleased to see that the FAA pretty much adopted what we had recommended on the ARC. But to kind of simplify this, what's happening is your drone is broadcasting some data. It's broadcasting an ID number, and it's broadcasting its longitude and latitude. All right, it's doing that several times per second. You can comply either with having it built into the drone, or for legacy drones that don't have it, you can attach a module to it. Or if you you don't want to do that and you just want to let's fly in a particular area, you can fly in what was called an FAA recognized identification area. So those are areas that not individuals, but organizations apply to have these free areas, and you don't have to have ID within those areas. And then closing out with UAS registration, if you're a recreational operator, you can have one registration certificate for all your drones. It's $5. It's valid for 3 years. You apply online. If you're operating under 107, you must register each of your drones individually at the cost of $5 a piece. And it is also valid for 3 years. Okay. All right. Been my pleasure to be here. Thank you to the Kings. Thanks for Textron. Thanks for Brian for doing all the heavy lifting on this. And I think I've got about 2 minutes. Anybody have, first of all, anything to add? Did I say anything that was wrong? And I usually do, so I'm checking to see if you're awake. Yeah.
Question. For recreational use, let's say I want to use my DJI at home. Thanks. And I just want to fly around the neighborhood or whatever. You know what I mean? Not over people, but I don't need the 107 certificate, do I?
Okay. So the question he asked, if you didn't hear the beginning of it, he says, I just want to use my drone recreationally. I want to fly around, my backyard, neighborhood. We kind of get into a gray area there, but at least we'll say your backyard, right? Do I need a 107 certificate? And the answer is absolutely no. There's an exception carved out for recreational users. Some of the things, it has to truly be for recreation, has to be below 400 feet. If you're in controlled airspace, you have to use LANs to get access to the controlled airspace, and you have to operate within community guidelines, which read between the lines, Academy of Model Aeronautics. You basically have to read their code and apply that to your operations. 55 pounds, yeah. So it's under 55 pounds, yes. And your drone has to be registered. Okay. And again, that's really easy. If you no Part 107 certificate required to do that, sir. Other questions or comments? Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of people flying drones, but who is the person that is ensuring that the person actually has their Part 107?
That's a great question. So, any law enforcement officer can request to see that. And before I left active service in the police department, we were starting to get calls at places like public parks, and I think people were more concerned about, hey, my 14-year-old daughter's sunbathing and the neighbor's looking at her with a drone. And so when we would respond to those, we actually had to do training with our officers. It was brand new to us, right? And so they had us come out from air support, and we had to kind of research it and say, well, what can you do? And in the initial, it was not a lot we could do because there wasn't a Part 107, and other than to tell them, look, you can't fly these, it's illegal, you can't do this. Oh, it's just a hobby. And then when Part 107 came along, it gave us a little more teeth. But, those people, if they've got, any sense at all, they're saying, well, I'm a recreational operator. I don't need to have a remote pilot certificate. But what we've now trained our officers to do is, yes, but you need a registration certificate. May I see your registration certificate? And when 9 times out of 10 they fail to produce it, quite frankly, what my former agency does is we seize the drone. And then we book it into evidence, and then we turn it over to the local FSDO. To get to the heart of your question, who should be doing that? Safety inspectors from the FSDO. Do they have time to do that? No, absolutely not. So, any other questions or comments? Yes, sir.
One thing, the company that I work for, we train about 350 managers.
And you know what? I'm going to bring my mic over to you. He says his company trains about 350 managers.
We train about 350 managers in doing this. And if you're going to do this commercially, one thing that we learned is using the visual observer. Establish we called it a red zone in my industry, but it's the same thing as sterile cockpit. The visual observer, make sure you have visual observers when you're doing any kind of intensive work, because you'll have people coming up saying, can I see your drone? Can I see what's going on? Part of the job of the visual observer is not just to watch the drone, but to make sure that the pilot flying is not interfered with. Just a comment, not so much a question, but if you're going to do this seriously, this is it's risk management. That's all I'll say.
Thank you for sharing the love. That's exactly what I wanted, because there is experience here, and that's a great point to make. And I'll kind of conclude, because we're out of time, with another quick example, and that was at DAPL, the Dakota Access Pipeline protests. When we got there, they didn't really know what to do with us, and they said, what can you do? And we told them. They said, okay, well, just flitter off, go do it. And we said, well, hold on just a second. There's thousands of protesters here, and there's 2 of us, and one of us is flying, and the other's serving as a visual observer. Who's watching our back? Oh, well, what do you need? I go, well, I need at least a team of 2 people that are gunslingers that are going to do this. Well, you're both deputies, you're both armed. What did you not just hear about what I said? We're going to be engrossed in the operation of the aircraft. We need someone else. And so they assigned us every day at least a 2-officer team. And I can tell you, just in the time I deployed out there, because we did rotating deployments, they saved, excuse me my language, they saved my ass at least 3 times of protesters who were going to come up and probably hurt us. And so great point on security and just being able to keep people at a distance from your operation.
Great topics. One that I'll add that we've communicated the big key for. Okay. The big keyword with a lot of high schools and everything right now is STEM. And this is a great opportunity that we've found. So you want to know, how do you integrate this into your business? How do I work with more high schools? How do I get that pipeline flooding? Well, they'll come to you and maybe talk about private pilot ground school. But what STEM is really seeking is some type of a completion for their class. And you go into them with a big dollar figure behind a private pilot, then, that kind of turns them away, because not everybody in the class can afford it. The school can't afford it. They're trying to think, how do we do this? Well, what we've done is we recommend the introduction go through private pilot ground school. You can go there and teach it. You can use the King curriculum with them, and then we've got in-classroom materials that work well. But then use the drone program. They can go to Amazon and for $150 buy a drone, send them through 140 or 107. The student gets the certificate or the rating when they're done. So now you've got the STEM completion, and that those that really enjoyed it and understand it can move on their own if they've got some of that. So that's a way that you can plug in and get that pipeline from some of these STEM programs. And there's money in the government that will help fund those particular programs at the school. So again, thank you, Al, and UND and everybody for coming. Great presentation. This is a good topic.